Hi, this is Marcia.
And this is Kelly.
We are the 2U's of 2U's Fiber Adventures. Thanks for stopping by.
You'll hear about knitting, spinning, dyeing, crocheting, and just about anything else we can think of as a way to play with string.
We blog and post show notes at 2usfiberadventures.com.
And we invite you to join our 2U's Fiber Adventures group on Ravelry. I'm 100 Projects.
And I am Better in Motion.
We're both on Instagram and Ravelry, and we look forward to meeting you there.
Enjoy the episode. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Marcia.
How are you?
I'm on my second cup of coffee now because we talked a little bit before the podcast, but when you called, I had been up for about 20 minutes.
Oh, well, I did better. I had been up for about 2 hours.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I slept in this morning.
Wow.
Robert's off today, so there was no alarm, and I slept in, and then when I woke up, it was like, I better get ready because I have to talk to Marcia in 20 minutes. But now my voice is a little more awake because we've been talking a little bit before the show.
We have a conversation before the conversation.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, I have to give everybody, the listeners, an update. People who follow me on Instagram probably know this already, but my son Ben left for Alaska last Wednesday, August 1st, and he rode his motorcycle.
Yes.
Well, I have to tell you something kind of funny is that he'd been talking about this for a while, and then I've been asking him, so when are you leaving? Being the planner that I am, what's going on? Do we need to get you anything? He's like, I got this under control. And then he announced, the week before that he was leaving on the 1st. He had some concerns about camping because people had really scared him about bears. And he did a camping trip here in the state the beginning of the summer and didn't sleep at all. He'd gone with his girlfriend, and I thought, I'd see them the next morning or the next day, in the afternoon, and they walked through the door at 9 o'clock in the morning. And they didn't sleep a bit because they heard all these noises. So he was kind of concerned about camping, well, mostly in British Columbia, because most of the Alcan Highway is in British Columbia, the part that he was doing anyway. But he was so worried about bears. So I said, well, let's just book you some motels. So we did that on the Monday before he left. But the funny thing is we were just doing some research online, and we found a really good website talking about planning for this ride. And the first thing it said is you need to allow a year to plan for your trip. And we allowed 3 days. And that's not exactly true because he had gotten all of his camp gear in order. And
yeah.
He's frugal, so he used Paul's tent that he used when he guided in the Quetico and the Boundary Waters back in Minnesota and up into Canada in the 80s, I think.
Oh, my gosh.
And the tent is still good. It's just that the little, the elastic cording on it had failed, so he just went out and bought new cording for it and got that all refurbished. And he wanted some lightweight cook pot, so he just went to the Goodwill and found something. But anyway, it's just kind of interesting how he's just recycling all this stuff and from our time camping,
from the old days,
the old days from the 80s and the 90s. He left on Wednesday, August 1st. He picked August 1st because it's the number one. So he was just thought that was a nice starting point. He was in BC most of the time, the first night he was in north of Whistler in a town called Lillooet, BC. The second he was in Houston, BC. The third he was in Stewart, BC. And the fourth he camped at Boyle Lake Provincial Park. And then the fifth he arrived in Whitehorse, BC. And then the sixth, he was supposed to find a place to stay. That we left that open, and he decided he had found a campground. It's a private campground specifically for motorcyclists. So he was excited about staying in that. But it rained the entire day. And even though he has really good rain gear, just spending 8 hours out there, on a motorcycle in the rain, he was soaked through. So, and he realized because it was raining so hard, he couldn't build a fire. The cabins that they had were not heated, and he was so cold. He just made the decision to stay on the motorcycle and ride straight through to Anchorage, which was another 6 hours. So he spent 12 hours on the motorcycle in the rain. 12 hours on the motorcycle, pouring down rain.
Well, he's young.
So he's young. Young and dumb. No. Because he could have gotten a motel, you know. But anyway, but he drove straight through to Anchorage, and then this is kind of cool where he's staying. He's staying with a classmate. The young man that I had rented a room to is back in Alaska where he's from, and he's working now in Anchorage. His father owns a airplane hangar because he has planes, and so they're staying in Anchorage at the airport at the airplane hangar because there's an apartment in the airplane hangar.
Interesting.
So that's where, very interesting, yeah. And so that's where they're going to be for Monday through Friday while his friend is working, and Ben's going to spend his time just exploring Anchorage. He's already scoped out the climbing gym, and he's already met a group. In fact, yesterday he went climbing with a group. And so that's pretty cool. And so he'll probably be there about a month, and then the plan is to take the ferry back. There's a ferry that runs from Ketchikan, Alaska to Bellingham, Washington, and then I think it's like 38 hours on the ferry, and then he can just ride home from Bellingham back to Seattle. But we had a neighborhood party yesterday, and I was talking to, there's two men in the neighborhood that have connections to Alaska, and they pointed out that there's no way, right now, they said there's no way to get from Anchorage to Ketchikan. And you can't,
That's interesting.
So I live in Washington State, and I think anybody who lives in the lower 48, you can just drive to all these places, right? But Alaska, my understanding, and any listeners out there who may know more about this than I do, if you know how to get my son to Ketchikan to get on the ferry, message me. I was looking at the ferries, and there's all these ferries going different places, but they said that the way Alaska is set up, that most of the cities, you either have to fly into them or you have to arrive by ship. You can't, there aren't roads that go, there's no road that goes from Anchorage to Ketchikan, and all these cities are not connected by roads because of, I don't know why. I'm assuming the lands, the geography. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think it's just Alaska is a whole nother world up there, and it's remote, and so it's not like the lower 48 where we have roads going to all the major cities. What these guys were saying is that the other thing is just you have fishing boats that are coming down to Seattle all the time. So the issue is not just transporting Ben. The issue is also transporting the motorcycle. Right. The other thought was, he can contact a fishing boat and get on a fishing boat. They'll take the motorcycle and he can just, pay a fee. They'll take the motorcycle and he could probably ride along on the fishing boat too.
Interesting.
I don't know. I said the other option is, maybe he flies home and he just contacts a carrier. They're moving goods to Alaska and moving goods, fish and stuff out of Alaska. There's got to be some sort of transportation. He just puts it on a ship and it comes back down to some sort of cargo ship. There'll be a way to figure it out. Well, and I did look, and you can't actually, to say there's no road going to Anchorage is not actually correct. There is a road. It's just that it takes a day and a half. You have to go from Anchorage. It's basically you're having to backtrack and then approach it from a different direction, apparently. So it is a day and a half. It's like 18 hours of riding or something.
Well, I mean, he's going to be gone a month. What's a day and a half?
Yeah, really. I mean, he's 20.
That's right.
But it's been kind of interesting just to follow his route. He would call us every night if he had Wi-Fi service. He would call us. He'd FaceTime us, and so quite an adventure. I'm glad he arrived safely. I have to admit, I did have some anxiety about him out there on a motorcycle.
Well, the pictures and video that he was posting, spectacular.
Yeah, gorgeous. Also
so remote. You would say to yourself when you saw them, wow, he's in a really pretty place. Wow, I'm even more worried.
You're right. I was worried about the motorcycle breaking down. But the good thing is the reason why this motorcycle is so popular is it's easy to work on.
Yeah.
And
he knows what he's doing.
And he knows what he's doing before he left. He did all this work to it, new tires, new chain, fleshed all the fluids, he did all this stuff. And he brought parts with him, and he had actually practiced how do you repair the chain if you can't lift, because he has a lift that he puts the motorcycle on, and he actually practiced what do you put it on to lift it up, and brought extra fuel with him, which he did run out of gas. And so he had a 2.5 gallon gas, can with him.
Right. So he didn't really run out. Yeah. The main tank ran out, but he had supplies.
Yeah. I will say, honestly, even though there's a part of me is like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of worried. There's a a bigger part of me is just thinking, this is such a fantastic trip. I would love to be able to. Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned this before. I've not mentioned it in the podcast, but I think you and I talked about this, that in the 70s, my brother, when he's a little kid, he would get, it was either Car and Driver or Road and Track, one of the car magazines. And in there was an article about a man driving the Alcan highway in a Corvette.
Yeah.
And how he had modified the Corvette with this rack on the back to hold gas, because at that time, sections were dirt. And there were not services in between. You had to carry gas.
Pack
with
everything,
you. Now that's not quite true. But when I remember reading that article, thinking, I want to do this.
I had the same thing. That was in the back of my mind. I don't know what time period it was, probably in the 70s, that I thought, I want to travel. And I don't know why this came into what I read, but I want to travel on the Alcan Highway to Alaska. Yeah. So it's one of those dreams that people have. That it's really cool that he's getting to realize that.
I think it's cool, too, that he did this because he wants time to think and figure out what he graduated from the community college in June, and he's going to take a little break and then figure out what the next step is for school. And so, I was laughing. It's like, well, 6 days on a motorcycle gives you time to think.
Yes, exactly.
And I also am really proud of him is that a huge reason why he did this is he was afraid to do it. He had a lot of fears, about riding his motorcycle that far and by himself. And that's, as we all know, fear of things is what holds us back.
Right. So, sort of like a quest.
Yeah. So I am really proud of him that he's done this. Okay. As I said, enough of that. Let's talk knitting.
All right. So have you finished anything? Started anything? What are you working on?
Yes, I did finish something. I finished my Summer Fjord.
Yay!
And that's by Trin Anelli. And I just remind people I use the Fibra Natura Flax, the 100% linen. I love the sweater. I love it. It's a T-shirt. It turned out a little bit differently than I thought it was going to look. And if people will probably remember what I talked about is I was using, it's supposed to be, isn't it fingering weight we're supposed to use? And I'm using,
it's a fingering weight. It's a pattern for fingering weight yarn, and I used lace weight, but I used the same gauge as the fingering weight. And you used what?
DK.
Okay, right, and did all kinds of calculations.
Right, and so... And what I was saying is that I did not, one of the podcasts I was talking about how I didn't read the pattern all the way through. And so I just was like how many stitches you cast on, for the neckline, and then it's just straight down. I didn't read it all the way through that you actually decrease the armhole. So it does a little bit of armhole shaping. And I think you remove 28 stitches.
Yeah, and that's what makes it like the drop shoulder.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what I realized is that was going to be fine, sort of fine through the bust. But if I kept that number of stitches, it would not fit over my hips. So I decided to start putting, I did the calculations with which we talked about, and I added increases all the way down. So it's sort of A-line. I put in more increases than I needed. It's a little, I don't know how to say, maybe a little flared kind of. Now that sounds bad. I don't think it looks bad. I think it looks fine. And I've asked people, what do you the women that I know that are sort of fashionistas, what do you think? And I said, be honest. And they've been honest. They said they like it. Yeah. And I do like it. It's kind of a little swingy kind of. It sounds weird.
Yeah, my nieces call that flowy.
Flowy. That's exactly what it is. And it's very
It's a flowy top.
Yes, and it's and the other thing, it's longer than I realized, and so the pattern, it's ribbing around the bottom, and it's just straight across the front, and then you do short rows in the back to shape it longer.
Yeah,
it's sort of tunic length, And so I was imagining more of a T-shirt and end up tunic length. But I don't know. I like it. And as I say, it's very comfortable. We've had hot weather in the high 80s, and that's hot for us. And because it's 100% linen, very, very comfortable and cool.
I love mine. I think it's a very underappreciated pattern. I don't remember. Let me look and see how many people have made it. Yeah, 45 projects.
Yeah.
This is really I think, an underappreciated pattern. It's really pretty. And it's pretty on the pattern page, too. It's striped on the pattern page, 2 different colors of yarn. And Marsha and I both made it solid.
I think it's 3 different colors of yarn.
Okay.
I think. I don't remember. But you and I both just made it out of a solid, just one color.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it has 2 contrast colors and a main color.
Yeah. And then the other thing I did is you kept saying just throw it in the dryer. It's meant to go in the dryer. I was like, I can't put it in the dryer. I can't. So I will admit I hand washed it. I did not put it in the washing machine, but I kind of let it damp dry, and then I threw it in the dryer. And I think it really does make it better. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to wash it again and throw it in the dryer and just see.
Yeah.
Because it does not shrink, which is what I was worried about.
Yeah, no. My swatch did not shrink at all.
Yeah. And then the other thing, just a little feedback, because we had the reason I picked this pattern is because it had the stripes.
Texture,
There's textured stripes going around it. And what we heard from the little class we had on linen is you need something to break up the stockinette. If you do something in straight stockinette, it will bias. And so if you break up that stitch pattern, you'll reduce the biasing. And I think that's true. My swatch biased pretty dramatically, just in stockinette. I didn't.
Yeah.
But this, I noticed it biases a little bit, but not enough that you would go, oh my gosh, what's wrong with that top? It's, so just a little bit of biasing. And I noticed too that the left sleeve, if I wear it for a while, then I look at myself in the mirror, the left sleeve ends up being shorter than the right sleeve. I think this might be, there's 3 things I think it could be. The neckline is kind of an open neckline. And I think it ends up sort of shifting a little bit on my body. Because I've actually, the exact same number of stitches, and when I lay the top out and measure the sleeves, they're exactly the same length. So I think it's the open neckline that the top tends to shift to the right. And I think the reason it shifts to the right is because I do have scoliosis, so my back is not straight. And so it's probably shifting because my body is shifted. And it could be a little bit of the biasing because there is a very subtle biasing in it. So I just wanted to throw that out just because there had been some talk about the...
Yeah, about the biasing. Well, it's funny because I have a few V-neck tees from Land's End that are never straight on my body. I'm crooked in some way. I'm crooked.
Well, and I'm going to say this. I do know that, like with women, I think all people, one foot is larger. One hand is larger. And then with women, one breast is larger.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of things that could be contributing to that besides the biasing. No, I love mine. I do. I think it's a very underappreciated pattern. And I'm looking at the project page or the pattern page that has all the projects on it. And they all look really good. I might make a striped one.
Yes,
now that I'm looking at all these. I do not like the color management of striping. But I like the look of the striping a lot.
Yeah, I like this. I would like to make a striped one too. So I agree with you. I think it's an underappreciated pattern. And I think it's also like the Edie. I think the pattern is flattering on all figures because of that drop shoulder. And I think it would be very flattering on all figures. But, anyway. Then the other pattern, though, I cast on for a new project. And it's the... Iba, I-B-A.
Yes.
I think that's pronounced either Iba or Iba by Bone Marie Burns. And I'm calling it Northern Lights Iba. And the reason I'm calling it that is because I decided to cast on August 1st when Ben left for Alaska.
Oh, nice.
And so I'm working on this because he's going to be gone about a month, and I'm going to see if I can finish it by the time he comes back. Now, it's not for him.
Right.
I'm just setting a goal. I just thought it'd be kind of fun to, because he's on this little adventure. I'm going to do my own little adventure.
That's fun.
But I wanted to say something about the yarn. And the yarn I'm using is the, Kelly, do you remember I bought the Rambouillet fleece?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was
the 2015 fair. It's the yarn. It's the fleece that we use to make the Raucous Rambouillet yarn that's in the shop.
Yes. So when I was down there in February, February, we wanted to try dyeing it, and it turned out a beautiful teal color. And so that's what I'm using. It's pretty. I love knitting with this yarn. It's Rambouillet, and it's soft
and textured.
Textured. It has what can I say? It has like bounce. The yarn is really round, kind of, and it has a lot of bounce, and it feels kind of almost slick, kind of.
Kind of silky in a way.
Silky and lustrous, kind of. But I don't know how to describe it.
So, I think, that Rambouillet that we have, one of the things that I like about it is that for a textured yarn, usually when a yarn is not smoothly spun, you don't have that silky feeling. Mm-hmm. You don't have the luster and... I don't know, I guess just kind of the silkiness of it. And that yarn to me has really a silky feel for as textury as it is. Yeah,
I agree. The pattern, I think, is going to be really nice with this yarn. It's a cardigan, but no buttons, and it has some patterning, mostly just I think what you would call this a broken rib down the back and the front. And then the rest is just stockinette. It's raglan sleeve, top down. The nice thing about this yarn, too, is it's what I'm doing is when I join the yarn, I'm just doing the spit splice, so I'll have no ends to weave in.
Nice. Yeah.
Which I think is nice in a worsted weight yarn not to have to weave in ends. And it takes really well to the spit splice.
I think that rib is going to be a really nice thing to have in that squishy yarn. This is a nice pattern. Yeah. I wish I had some Aran weight yarn to use. I'd make it too.
You have to spin some.
I guess so.
Anyway, Rambouillet. I recommend Rambouillet.
Yeah.
I think it's very nice. And I think it took the color really well too.
Well, and I'd like to have some more of this kind of Rambouillet in our shop. The textured Rambouillet. We don't have much left of that, but
that's it for me on projects. Other than just I have 2 shawls that I work on periodically when I'm doing something, social. The last thing too is my combo spin. My my third one I've been working on. The last time we talked, I had a total of 6 skeins, and I had divided my yarn or my fiber up to spin the last bit of it, and I've done nothing. And now this sweater is I wanted to finish the summer fjord so I could wear it, and now I kind of got on this Eba
Alaska or bust sweater.
Yeah, Alaska or bust. Oh, maybe I should change the name, Alaska or bust. Anyway, so I will get back and finish my combo spin because I have another combo spin in the works.
Yeah,
so.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway, your projects, what's going on?
Well, I have been, because I start school, so we're recording this on Wednesday. It'll probably go out on the weekend. I start school on Friday. We have an in-service day. I'm actually looking forward to it. I'm ready to go back.
Oh, okay.
This is the first summer in a long time that I've actually been ready to go back. So that's a good thing. That means my work-life balance is in a good place. So I feel good about that. But yeah, Friday is our in-service day. And so my own personal stash dash ends on Monday or Sunday night when I go to bed. So I've been madly scrambling to get things done. And I have to say, I have 8K.
Wow.
Yes, 8 kilometers, a little over 8 kilometers of yarn used finished in projects this summer. Some of them were already started before the summer came. I've got one more project on the needles that is going to be finished. It's another one of those Sockhead cowls, and actually we've been talking so long this morning that I might actually be able to finish it on Friday at school. That's my plan. Is that this will be my knitting for Friday's in-service day, and maybe I'll actually bind off on Friday. And then that doesn't even count my spinning. And there's not a good way to quickly add up my spinning, but I think my spinning is another. So I'll have 10K by the end of my summer.
Nice. Yeah.
But I'll tell you what did it. What just really puts you over the top on yardage. Over 4,400 meters in my 3 blankets, the woven blankets.
Yeah.
That's, weaving uses the yarn, baby. Fast. I mean, it doesn't take as much. For the area, weaving doesn't take as much yarn as knitting. If I had knitted 3 blankets, I would have used more yarn. Of the same size, I would have used more yarn. However, I wouldn't have been able to make 3 blankets in the time period that I made these 3 woven blankets. So in terms of time, weaving uses more yarn per time element, but not more yarn per square inch.
There must be a math formula for that, Kelly.
I was just thinking, nobody but a math teacher would be talking about it this way. Sorry. But anyway, the blankets I'll talk about because they are the most exciting finished project. And I don't think the recipient listens to the podcast. I doubt she has time. But these are going to be, these are baby blankets. They're really utilitarian blankets. They're cotton, 100% cotton. The warp was already in my stash as a warp. Somebody had warped it, abandoned the project. It must have been somebody who was not very experienced because there were knots in the warp threads. Not very many, but there were knots, and you don't do that. If you get to the middle of that and you run out of yarn, you go back and you make your knot at the beginning. You don't have a warp or a knot in the middle of your warp. So I had to deal with that a couple of times. Yeah, it was a 6-yard warp, 380 ends. So just the warp alone was 2,000 meters. Just the warp. So, and then I used my cotton stash. I made one in a pale green, just plain pale green, and just let the patterning of the weaving do the talking. And then I made 2 of them. The other 2 were simpler weave structures, and then I used stripes at either end. So, and I'm not very good at making my stripes the same size. This is an interesting thing about weaving. Well, partly it has to do with me, too, not keeping good records. Also, my yarns are all different. When you weave and you pack in your threads, you know, your weft threads.
Right.
As you weave more and more, those stripes can compress even more. Even though so you're past the stripe, but as you're packing in to the following fabric, it starts to compress things below it or before it. Does that make any sense at all? Like let's say you go 5 inches past the stripe and you're beating. That's when you pull the thread down with the beater and you pack it in. Even if you're not packing it tightly, the pressure of all those threads adding up sort of packs your stripe a little tighter. And so it gets a little smaller. So this is what I've found, is that even when I measure it and my stripe is 2 inches and then I keep going and then on the other end I make a 2-inch stripe. When I take it off the loom and look at it, the first 2-inch stripe and the second 2-inch stripe are not the same.
Right.
The first 2-inch stripe is slightly smaller than the second 2-inch stripe. Because it's not 2 inches anymore, obviously.
Right.
So,
I'm sorry. Math.
I know, really. A pound of feathers and a pound of rocks. Yeah, they both weigh a pound. Yeah. But anyway, so what was a 2-inch stripe has become slightly less than 2 inches, and then the other one is 2 inches. I like to make weaving asymmetrical because it doesn't turn out symmetrical even if I try. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I don't try that hard.
If you were the type of person that really cared about this, and it was very technical, would you just put in fewer web, right? Fewer rows?
I think so. Or
to balance.
Or maybe if you counted, like maybe I don't pack the same. My tension, kind of like tension in knitting, maybe my tension is off. And by the time I get to the end of the project, I'm less, I'm packing it less. Like maybe I have a softer touch because I've been working on it longer. I have a very difficult time making things, even when I try really hard to make them the same length, I have a difficult time making them come out the same in my weaving. And so I'm not a very technical spinner, and I'm not a very technical weaver. And I think if I were more technical, I could probably handle that. Mm-hmm. But I handle it by making asymmetrical things.
Yeah.
So anyway, the blankets are done. They're really nice, I think. And they can be in the washing machine over and over and over. They'll just get softer. I like them. And I think they'll hold up really well. I'm really happy with how they came out. And I'm really excited to be able to give her 3 baby blankets. That just seems extravagant.
Yes.
So it was really fun. I enjoyed doing it. So that project is done.
Yeah, I say anybody with 3 hand-woven baby blankets is special.
Yeah. And,
that's special.
And I mean, it really was not, that's the thing about weaving. It just, I don't know. If you put on a long warp, you can make a lot of whatever it is you're making. And it doesn't really, it took me, I started them in June and finished them in August. So 2 months. But that wasn't 2 months of working on them every day. For a long period of time, they just sat on the loom in the garage. So the other thing I finished, also spirit yarn, was that cowl that I was working on, the Sockhead Cowl in the Becoming Art yarn that you got, that I stole. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing I finished, well, I had already talked about finishing it. I called it finished before, but I made a mother bear, but I didn't have a face on it. So I put the face on the bear. So that's done. And so I was talking about, having a clean slate. And some of our listeners were talking also about having a clean slate. So that leaves me with 2 things, one of which I have lost the yarn. So I put it in hibernation. The Coloresque Wrap that I started for stitches. And I think that might be a sign that I need to rip it out and just start over. It's the gradient yarn kit from Neighborhood Fiber Company. I think I talked about the fact that I can't find the rest of the yarn.
Right.
The last time.
It's there someplace.
It's here. I just need to find it. But I can't go any further until I find it. Mm-hmm. And then the other one that I'm going to rip out is the socks that I started from the sock blank. And both of these were Stitches West 2018 projects. The wrap I cast on sort of as in a panic of not having knitting for stitches. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the socks were also like, oh my gosh, okay, well, I'm just going to buy a sock blanket and I'm going to knit the socks at Stitches. Mm-hmm. That was my plan. I think both of those are big fails, and I just need to rip them both out. And not just because that will give me a clean slate on my project page, but because
that is a benefit.
It is a benefit, yes. Mm-hmm. Because I am not happy with the socks. I put them on. I talked last time about how I put them back on my double points, but they're not going to be long enough to show the color of the gradient unless I make them bigger. And so, I can't make them knee socks after the fact because they won't go up over my calf that far. So they have to be ripped out if I want to make them longer. And maybe I don't want to make them socks at all. And then that wrap, I think maybe I just need to rethink what I do with that yarn when I find it. I don't know what I do with I have to say it's one of these things. Robert says I say this a lot. I distinctly remember. That's a phrase that gets me into trouble. I remember I was in the living room, and all of the yarn that I had wound up was in a bag with that project. And I needed something to take to work for a meeting. So I exchanged, and I took something out of a small bag, and I put only the one ball of yarn that I needed and the project in the other bag. And I didn't even need the pattern, so I didn't put the pattern in the small bag either. The pattern is in the larger bag where all the skeins are, and now I don't know where it is.
You don't know where the little ball is, or the whole bag?
I found the little ball with the project. It was in my office. I did remember that. But I don't know. I can't find the other part of it that has all the rest of the skeins and the pattern and my plans for how I was going to do the color and stuff. So I think it's a sign from the universe that this was ill-conceived because it was a panic cast on.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real thing. I've had that moment before where I have a panic of I need something to knit, and I grab something and I start, and then it just goes badly. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened with I think this is what's happened with this project. It was a panic cast on, was not well thought through, and yeah. So both of these projects are going to be, well, one is just going to, I put it in hibernation because I can't find it, the rest of it. But I think when I find it, it's all going to go back to being yarn. Mm-hmm. And then I'm definitely unraveling those 2 at a time socks. Mm-hmm. So then I'll have a double sock blank, and I have to figure out what I want to do with a double sock blank. I thought, I could make them like into leg warmers.
I have another thought.
Yeah.
Of course, there's always a shawl.
Yeah.
I know, and that's how I...
Well, that means I have to separate the sock blank. Well, that would be fine. I could do that. I could separate the sock blank, but yeah. So there's a shawl. Go on.
Well, or the other thing is so how many yards do you have?
I don't know.
If you
it's like 100 gram, so like 400 yards.
400 yards.
Ish, right around there.
And it's wool. What is the fiber?
It's wool.
Okay. Then never mind. I was going to say, could you combine it with another yarn and have it act as a gradient? Like, you see those sweaters where they have the gradient with a solid and do stripes?
Oh, I could.
And then, but this is the thing, is because it's wool, I think this won't work for you, but then make a top out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could combine it with something else to create like or maybe you don't want to you like that yarn, so you don't want it. Well, the gradient, the sock one, you'd be okay giving that away, right?
Yeah. I actually thought to myself, I don't want to waste this gradient sock blank on blah, blah, blah. And I thought, that's dumb. That's just dumb. I can buy another one. Really? I mean, seriously. Mm-hmm. I can buy another one, and I can, if I really want, I don't have to worry like I used it on the wrong project. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what I kind of told myself when I was going to just go ahead and make 2 pairs of socks out of it. But I'm not feeling it. There's too many things that have gone wrong. It needs to just turn into something else.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to be socks.
Yes. It's telling you.
And my neighborhood fiber company, as much as I like that Coloresque Wrap pattern, that neighborhood fiber company yarn it has run away. It's run away from home because it doesn't want to be a Coloresque Wrap.
Don't make me a Coloresque Wrap. I don't want to be that.
So it's hiding. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I'm very close to having 0 projects in my project page, and that is kind of cool. But I am planning something, and you and I have talked about this. Marsha even went through her stash to try to help me see if I could make things match. But on the Two Knitlit Chicks podcast, Barb and Tracy were talking about this. Tracy was trying to combine 2 yarns, and they weren't the same weight. And she swatched with both of them, and she decided that it was clear that they weren't going to work together. And so I was afraid that this wasn't going to work because I have the same issue. I have a cashmere cone of yarn that I bought from Webb's on sale. Oh, I don't know when. A couple years ago. And then I have this chickadee that I got in D-Stash at the retreat. Mm-hmm. Chickadee Sport. And the cashmere is a pretty light fingering, just looking at it from the cone. So, but I decided to go ahead and make a swatch. So I made the swatch. And actually, so Marsha was trying to help me find maybe a lace weight cashmere that I could pair with the cashmere I have so that it could be sport. You know, they could be closer in gauge. Anyway, you didn't find that, right? And
no.
And
well, I found some, but it's the wrong color.
Yeah.
It's like a magenta, and you don't want
the one I have is a sort of a taupey brown. I think it's the natural color. It's a taupey brown color. And then the chickadee is a pale version of your teal. Sort of a dusty teal. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I made the swatch, and the swatch doesn't look like the gauges are too vastly different. I mean, one is tighter than the other. Mm-hmm. The sport it has the same number of stitches per inch, but they're packed together more tightly. And the cashmere is more open. But I think it's going to work. And talking about wool and itching, I wore the swatch in my shirt yesterday. And I could not wear it inside my bra. That was not happening. I lasted about 5 minutes. Like, okay, no, this is not going to work. Mm-hmm. But I did wear it inside the arm of my shirt, on my shoulder, up near my neck, and then I put it at the back of my neck and wore it inside of the collar of my shirt, the cashmere side to my skin, and I forgot it was there.
Oh, good.
So that was really nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking for a pattern. I've been looking for a fingering weight pattern. What I really want is something like the featherweight, but with the raglan part of the sleeve bigger. You know, we've talked about how that sweater starts with too few stitches. From my shoulder, it starts with too few stitches between the two raglan increases.
Yeah. And you want something that you don't have to do a lot of modification and figuring out.
Exactly. So I've been looking. There's two of them. There's one called Caro, which actually has buttons, but I'm thinking maybe I could make it without buttons. It's a Hintern-Stein pattern. And then the other one I think is called Flame.
Popping in here during editing to say the pattern is called Flaming June, and it's a knitty pattern.
It's a knitty pattern that I had put in my favorites a while back, and as a fingering weight sweater, and then I sort of abandoned the plan to make it because it just was a little bit too much work at the start. It's bottom up. That's the part that and it has kind of a mitered thing going on at the bottom, so you have like a kind of an interesting bottom of the sweater. Mm-hmm. But the sleeves look good. It's open front, and that looks good. And the way people wear it, it doesn't look like they're having to hold it up to keep it on their shoulders in the project pages. So I think that's what I'm going to. One of those two are the two patterns that I'm thinking of using. That's in my future, casting on this sweater. Maybe for the Two Knitlet Chicks sweater knit-along. I don't know. I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but I've swatched.
Mm-hmm. That's the first step.
Yeah. Yeah. But I might just enjoy not having any projects. That's weird.
Yeah.
That makes me feel nervous.
Kelly, how can you enjoy that? Okay.
Well, I have other things that I need to get done, so it maybe could get me out in the garden. Mm-hmm. Or walking, or something. Yeah. But it wouldn't be too good for the podcast, so I got to start something soon.
I know.
So that's my projects.
That's it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I mentioned the 2 at a time socks and how they weren't going quite the way I wanted to, right? We had just that long discussion. But that brings me to a topic that there was a question about the other day. Well, actually, it was a couple weeks ago, I think. And I can't find the question, so I can't remember who it was. Sorry about that. But it was about making baby socks and the sock recipe or pattern that I use. And that actually relates to my regular sock pattern, which is why the 2 at a time socks didn't really work, because that's not what I usually do, and it wasn't fun. But that relates to what I do for regular socks is exactly the same thing as what I do for baby socks. So I thought that it would be fun for Marcia and I to talk about our sock recipes that we use. So, and our style of knitting socks. So Marcia, do you use double points, 2 at a time, toe up, cuff down? How do you do your socks?
I do the same thing every single time, unless I'm following a pattern, and I've only done that twice, I think. So I'm very. I need to branch out in the sock category. I have to say, now that we bring up this topic. So since I'm always using sock weight yarn, I have the measurements for my foot. Let me just back up. I got this because I took a sock class, and this is how we were taught to do it, and so that's how I do it. And I always cast on 68 stitches because I'm always using the same weight yarn. I use double-pointed needles, and I always do ribbing for about an inch, depending on how I.
So, what kind of ribbing do you do?
I just do a 1x1 ribbing.
Oh, 1x1. I was going to say because 68 isn't divisible by very many things.
Right.
Okay.
So I always just do a 1x1 ribbing, and then I should also say too, I used to just cast on stitches, but now I do that super stretchy cast on. You can, if you just on YouTube, type in super stretchy. I think there's one that Very Pink Knits does.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have videos on that. So I just do that now because I find that is easier to get like over your heel and whatnot. But anyway, it's more stretch to it. Anyway, and I just do 1x1 ribbing for about an inch. Then I do stockinette till it's about 7 inches. And then I divide those stitches in half.
And you use double points, right?
I use double pointed. I use bamboo. I don't, just because I find, well, honestly, it's because it's what I have.
Yeah.
It's what I have, and it's not that I'm wedded to the bamboo, it's just that what I have. And sometimes I find with the bamboo, they have a little bit more rounded tip, and sometimes it would be nice to have a little bit
pointier,
sharper tip.
Yeah.
Maybe I should invest in some better needles for that might be my birthday gift to myself, is to invest in some, since I'm always using the same size. So
get some sock needles that are more pointy.
Yeah. Anyway, and then I take those 68 stitches, and that, of course, is going to be different for everybody. That's just based on my measurement of my leg and my foot. But I divide those in half, so 34 I leave on I split those in half. So 34 what is that, 17, I think, on, I'm doing my math right? Yeah, 17 on
each
one needle.
Okay.
On 2 needles. I split that on 2 needles, and then the 34 are on 1 needle.
Oh, when you use double points, you use 4 double points, 3 with yarn on them, and 1 to knit with.
Yes.
Okay.
When I first start, when I'm just doing it in the round for the cuff and the leg part, I don't really care how many stitches are on each needle. I do like to finish each needle with, on the cuff anyway, I like to finish with purl stitches. So then my next, when I start the next needle that I start knitting
right.
with, I like to knit a knit stitch,
right?
Because then I can pull down on it a little bit, because I like to tug on it a little bit, the first 2 stitches. And that's a little bit easier with a knit stitch than a purl stitch.
Also, it's easier to remember what. I have a tendency to always just start my needle the same way. So if I ended on a knit stitch and I need to start on a purl, I'm going to make a mistake. That's why I asked you about 68 stitches, because I like to have a number of stitches that divides better for the number of needles that I have.
Oh, I see.
Right. And 68, it's divisible by not very many things.
Right.
2, 4, and 17.
Thank you.
Okay. Continue.
Anyway, I want them sort of somewhat evenly, but it's not that big a deal to me at that part. And in fact, I didn't even put a stitch marker in to measure the beginning of my round because I have that little tag, of yarn that I kind of know basically that's where the round.
Well, and I always thought that was weird. For that reason, I can tell where the beginning of the round is because I have my yarn there. But also, if I'm using double points or even if I'm using circulars, I know where the beginning of the round is because that's where my needle is.
Yes, exactly. I know.
I can't put a stitch marker there because
it wouldn't stay.
It wouldn't stay. I never have understood that. But anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I'm just a little sidetrack off of socks, but when I'm doing a sleeve, and when you're doing a sleeve in the round, like a top-down sweater, and you got to do that sleeve in the round, and then you have to track where the beginning of the row is to put your increases, your decrease, increase or decrease, your shaping, I should say. I always have to make sure the middle of the row. I have to make sure that the beginning of the row is in the middle of a needle.
Oh,
so my stitch marker will stay on,
right? Because
I can't, and then I find I can't have the. Otherwise, if you just use that first stitch on the new needle as your beginning of the row marker, if you're doing shaping, I find it doesn't work because you're going to have shaping on one needle, the beginning of one needle, and the ending of
another needle. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Anyway, okay, now I'm getting back to socks. So anyway, then I get down and when we do the heel flap, then I put 34 stitches, half the stitches on one needle for my heel flap. The other two are divided in half, and they go on the two needles, so I still have a triangle, right? And then I do my heel flap, which is, I slip the first stitch. Was it slip one, knit, slip one, knit?
So you do a slip stitch heel too.
Right, and then I purl back, do that, and then I do the heel flap until it's a ½ inch shorter than the width.
Okay. So you don't make a square heel flap?
No.
I always make a square heel flap. Okay.
Now, don't ask me.
No,
why.
yeah,
that's how I was taught. She said just however wide it is, you just make it a ½ inch shorter than that.
Right.
And then I go and I pick up stitches. How do I do this? Oh, then I go.
You turn the heel.
I turn the heel. And I find that you now need to, I turn the heel, and then I go and that turn heel now, I'm splitting that section onto two needles. And the two needles that each had 17 stitches, I now go put those back and I have 34 on that. I just put those all on one needle because I always just want to have a triangle. Right. I don't want to have 4 needles working 4 needles. I just want 3. So the two stitches that had 17 stitches, I now put those all onto one needle.
Right. So the instep of your sock, all those stitches are all now on one needle instead of 2, and the heel, the heel is now on 2 stitches or 2 needles.
2, right? And so. Yeah. Then I go and I pick up along the heel flap for the gusset, knit across the instep. Is that right? Then pick up stitches for the other gusset. And so now I still have 3 needles. 1 needle is for the instep and 2 needles for now on the either side of the gusset. Right. And so, I now have, when I finish the gusset, I want to have 17 stitches on each needle, right? Then I go and at every other row I decrease.
Do you decrease before the end of your gusset? Like decrease and then knit one and then move to the instep stitches? Or do you decrease at the end of the gusset, so you decrease and then you move to the instep stitches?
I think I decrease and then move to the instep.
Okay.
So I don't leave one stitch there.
Okay.
Which I don't know.
Depending on the sock, I do it differently, but I always have to remember which one I'm doing.
Now, if you do that, where you leave one stitch that you just knit, it probably would make a nice line.
It does make a nice line. I like it. Yeah. I like the way it looks, but I have to remember that that's what I'm doing.
So that is something I might consider. That's a really good idea because it would make a nice line.
Yeah, so you decrease and then you knit and then you do
Yeah. Not that anybody would see it. It's going to be in my shoe, but still.
I just like the way it looks. Yeah. And I do that on the toe too because I like the way it looks.
Okay, that's a good idea. Then, and I might consider that. Well, and actually on the toe I do that.
Oh, do you? Okay.
So don't ask. So now why? Why do I do it on the toe, but I don't do it on the heel?
Because that's how you were taught.
Yeah, that's how it's taught. So anyway, so then I've decreased all my gusset. Now I have, my 34 stitches on the instep. I have 17 stitches on each side of the gusset. And then I just knit around and around and around. So now they're not even at all, right? I mean, I have...
Well, 34, 17, and 17.
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's even, but it's not divided evenly.
Right.
To me, it doesn't matter, right? So then I do the whole
just knitting.
Instep. Mm-hmm. It's just knitting, and I just knit around until I get the length that I need. And what I was told is you knit, let's see, I'm looking at my foot. You knit until you reach the nail of your little toe.
That's about where that's what I do too.
And then you start your decreases for
your
the toe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's decreases every other row until you have about, in the last 4 rows of the toe before you then do the Kitchener stitch, you decrease every row. Mm. So so you don't end up with a point.
Right.
You end up more rounded. Now, that's how I did that's what I was told to do, and that's how I did the first couple of socks. I find, though, that I have kind of pointy, my big toe is a little longer than, my toes just don't go straight across. Mm-hmm. My big toe is a little bit longer. And I found that I make my socks a little pointier, and I like to have them a little bit pointier. So I actually now knit, I want to have it a little longer, so I actually knit probably to the end of my 4th toe. The toe next to my little
so you
toe.
go out further before you start the toe decreases. I go out
further, because I like to have a little bit more space.
Mm-hmm.
There.
I'm always guilty of making my socks just a little bit too short. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not always. I'm always tempted to make my socks a little bit too short, and I have some socks that are a little bit too short, and I think it's because I just want to be done. It's like you can smell the barn, right?
And I always make mine a little long. I rather have them a little bit long.
Well,
and this is my theory is, they're more comfortable for me.
Yeah.
And also, I don't want to, if I feel like if they're too short, they're going to wear out.
It's true.
My big,
Yeah. It's true. So I have to resist the temptation to start the decreases too soon, just because I want it to be finished.
And then the other thing is, I always do my socks top down. And I've never done like an afterthought heel. Mm-hmm. I've never done a toe up. I've never done 2 at a time. I've only made 1 pair of socks that had patterning in it. And this is what it was. I think it's just what I'm doing on this cardigan, like a broken rib, where you're doing, it was like a 2x2 rib. Mm-hmm. And the purl part of the rib, like 1 row you would just do all knit. Mm-hmm. And then 1 row would be purl. So anyway, I have several sock books that I look at that have all this interesting lace and cable and all these interesting things and color work. And I can't, at this point, I have never been able to wrap my head around they just come in one size, right? So that's not going to fit me. It's going to be too small. So now how do I adjust the pattern to make a larger sock?
Yeah.
And I haven't gotten that far yet.
Well, you find a pattern that has different sizes is one way. I mean, some sock patterns have small, medium, and large.
Some do, but
a lot of them don't.
I like the pattern, but it doesn't have it. And then how do you, if the pattern goes across 12 stitches or something, I have no idea how to...
Right.
I haven't even wrapped my head around that at all. So I just keep making the same sock over and over again. But then I'm using, self-striping yarns
you let the yarn do the work. I have done afterthought heels, and I have done toe-up socks. I've tried 2 at a time, and actually I don't really enjoy any of those things. I enjoy the 2 at a time the least. When I started doing socks, I started with double points. And, of course, when you first start knitting with double points, it's so hard to manage everything. And then this was in the late 90s, and I was on the spin list. And somebody on spin list was talking about doing socks with 2 sets of circular needles, or 2 circular needles. So one on the back, one's on the back, one's on the front. And I actually liked that, and I made lots of socks early in my sock knitting career with the two circulars. You do have like things hanging everywhere, but I did enjoy that more than I enjoyed the double points. And then at some point I started using double points again, and that's what I almost exclusively use now. And I really that's my preferred way: top down, double points, heel flap and gusset. And I do the same thing. My heel flap is half my stitches. And so so I cast on, it depends. 64 is a good number because it's divisible by a lot of things. Mm-hmm. But I also like 72 because it's also divisible by a lot of things. And why that makes a difference is because I do 2x2 rib. So if you do 2x2 ribbing, that's a multiple of 4. So you need something to be a multiple of 4 right. for that to work. And then if you want to put them on 4 needles, which is what I do, that's kind of nice to be able to have something that's a multiple of 4. So you can have 4 working needles or 4 needles with stitches on them, and then a 5th needle that you work with. And do you know the reason I like to do that better than 3?
Because you like things even and symmetrical and logical and divisible and I don't know.
Divisible is nice, but no, not because of even and symmetrical. I like to try on my socks as I go.
Oh.
And when you have them on 3 needles,
that's true.
It's tricky.
Mm-hmm. And I've broken needles because I tried to try it on.
Me too. So, but if you put it on 4 needles, it's a lot easier to try them on as you go. And so that's why I switched to double points where you have 5. And then I like to use the Brittany wood needles. Those are my favorites. Size 0, I think, is the size I have. Although I do sometimes use size 1s. I have size 2 sock needles. Also, I have a plastic set of size 2s that I also like. But I haven't made size 2 needle socks in a while. So I have a variety of stitch counts that I use for my socks, depending on what size needles I'm using. But 64 doesn't really work very well. 64 can be a little bit too tight if I'm using the zeros. Mm-hmm. So I need bigger.
Thinking just along this topic about, do you ever do a swatch?
No. Although I guess you could say I'm willing to start and start over. Mm-hmm. Like if I start them and then I'm looking at it and like, oh, this looks like it's going to be too small, then I'll get an inch of it and try it on and go, oh no, that's too tight. Mm-hmm. I did not do that with these 2 at a times, which is the problem, part of the problem. I don't purposely set out to do a swatch, but I start socks with a willingness to start over.
Yeah.
So, but usually I use the same number. With the size 0, 72 works well. I like to do 2x2 ribbing, and I like the whole top of the sock to be ribbing. If I'm not doing something with patterning, I like to make the whole leg of the sock ribbing. Mm-hmm. I like knitting ribbing. I like the way the ribbing looks and feels. Ribbing always fits. And when I do baby socks, I almost always do the whole top of the sock, the whole leg of the sock as ribbing.
Yeah.
Because it stays on. Or at least I think it stays on.
Yeah. And I don't have the problem with the socks falling down in just the stockinette. But I will say that the socks I did with the broken rib, I like. They're probably my favorites. Mm-hmm. I like the color, but I also I like the way they fit and the feel.
Yeah, yeah. So. And I've done socks with ribbing that goes all the way down the top of the foot, but not the bottom. So I've done that. But I don't prefer doing that because I like when you get to the foot that you just do stockinette all the way around. It's more complicated to remember to do a pattern on the instep and then go back to stockinette for the bottom of the foot. So, but I do the same as you with the half my stitches become the heel flap. I like to do an eye of partridge heel, but
oh no, what's that?
So that's where you do slip one, knit one all the way across. And then I always slip on the purl row too. Not every other. I slip the first stitch of the purl row. So I've got slipped stitches on both sides. And then on the next row, the right side row, instead of doing slip one, knit one, slip one, knit one, slip one, knit one, you do the reverse, except I always slip the first one. So I do slip one, and then it would be knit. So I slip the knits and knit the slips. So it's opposite. So it alternates. And that's the eye of partridge heel. And I like that. But often when I'm doing that, I get off. And so I have a little mistake in my eye or partridge heel. I never have mistakes if I just do the slip stitch heel. And I like that one too. And I do that because I learned, I don't know if it's even true, that it's more durable with the slip stitches in there.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too.
I don't know if it's more durable or not, but I just like the way it looks. I don't like the way a stockinette heel, because I've done a stockinette heel too to try it. I don't like the way a stockinette heel looks. It looks too baggy. I like the way the slip stitches kind of cinch up the heel a little.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to say another thing too about why I like doing the heel flap that way is what I like about socks is, you do the ribbing, and then when you get tired of the ribbing, you do the stockinette of the leg. When you get kind of bored with that, you get to do the heel flap, and it's not just stockinette, it's you do the slip, everything that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Then you get to do the turning the heel, then you get to do the gusset, and then when you're like, okay, I'm tired of all this keeping track of all of the decreases every other row, now I get to just do stockinette all along the foot, and now I'm getting bored with that. I get to do the toe shaping.
Yeah.
So it mixes it up,
And I use this as an example in my class with my students of why you want to repeat, that repetition helps you learn. That one of the things about learning to make socks that I think would be really, really good is to make them in parallel. So have two sets of needles, cast on your first sock, do an inch of ribbing. All right, cast on your second sock, do an inch of ribbing. Because ribbing is hard when you first start knitting.
Yeah.
And you make mistakes. I mean, you could even cast on and do all the ribbing, however much your pattern calls for, and then start your second sock and do the same thing over. Because that repetition, that helped me learn how to make the socks. I really liked that you were doing, you had two of them, and so once you learned it on the first one, you could practice it on the second one. And if you practice right away, it really solidifies it in your mind. I don't now typically knit socks in parallel that way. I usually just make the whole first sock and then the whole second sock. But when I was first learning, I liked doing that, and I had needles so that I could. It's one of the only places where I actually bought extras of equipment. On purpose bought extras of equipment. Usually I'm like, I don't need to do that. But for socks I did. So now when I get to the heel, when I turn the heel, what I learned is you go 2 stitches past the center, and then that's where you do your, decrease. So knit 2 together or slip, slip, knit, or purl 2 together, depending on which side you're on, and then knit 1 and then turn. And then you go 5 stitches back and do the same thing. And then you go back and forth, back and forth. Sometimes I end up with it comes out perfectly, and sometimes I have to do one row where I have to do an extra decrease because, I already used up all the stitches on one side, but I still have to go back and use up the stitches on the other side. And I don't really care about that. It does not make any difference at all in your sock.
I say the one thing about socks is no one really sees them because
they're inside your shoes. Well, and you can't tell by looking. I can't ever tell by looking which ones worked out perfectly where you did those decreases for the heel turns and which ones ended up with, okay, they weren't matching and I had to, both sides didn't decrease at the same rate, and I, for some reason, ended up having to do an extra row on one side. Yeah. So that's how I do the heel turn, and then I already talked about how I do the gusset. And then you just work on the foot. And then the other thing that one of the reasons I don't like to have different numbers of stitches on my needles, I like the divisibility so that every one of my needles can have the same number of stitches. Mm-hmm. At least when I get, when I'm going on the foot or doing the ribbing. I don't know how many times I've gotten down to the foot, down at the bottom of the foot to do the toe, and I've forgotten that I don't have the same number of stitches on the top of the foot as I have on the bottom. Mm-hmm. And when you do your toe decreases, it matters. Mm-hmm. Like one time I did my toe decreases, like not in line with the top of the foot and the bottom of the foot. My toe decreases were like, instead of being on the two sides, one was like on the top of the foot and the other one was on the bottom of the foot because I didn't get them all organized before I started the decreases.
Yeah, and that's why the heel flap, from the heel flap on, I keep the stitches evenly divided. Yeah, top and bottom. Right, so that the shaping for the gusset aligns with the shaping of the toe. Yes.
And I've made that mistake so many times that I just now keep them even. Yeah. And then, so the toe, the normal toe, I think they call it a wedge toe. That's the one you do and I do, where you decrease on either side, right? Aligned with the gusset. And then it makes the toe of your sock look triangular, right? Pointy. Mm-hmm. So Robert always says, another one of his criticisms of socks, which it's not really a criticism, but he's like, so can you make the toes not pointy? Why are the toes always pointy? To me, it doesn't matter. When you wear the socks, it doesn't hurt anything. But I found what he likes is the toe that I used from the Civil War socks, which is like a hat decreases. Mm. So that is you decrease. You start by... So you need a multiple of 8 in your stitch count. And so you break them up into groups of 8. And then, you knit across, you knit 6, and then you've got 2 stitches and you knit them together. Mm-hmm. And then you knit the next 6, knit 2 together, knit 6, knit 2 together. And then you do a bunch of plain rounds. You do like 6 plain rounds or 7 plain rounds. And then you do the same thing. Right, knit 5, knit 2 together, knit 5, knit 2 together, etc. And then you do like 5 rows of plain, and then you go knit 4, knit 2 together, like a hat decrease. So there's decreases all around the toe. And when I saw that pattern, I thought, that's weird. That is going to make the weirdest looking toe. I can't imagine that, but I did it, and they come out. The toes come out round. Because if you think about it, the top of a hat comes out round, too. The top of a hat is rounded. Yeah. So that works great for his socks because then he doesn't give me a hard time about pointed toes. So, yeah. So that's my I think that's everything about socks. And I do exactly the same thing for baby socks. Top down, half the stitches become the heel. Oh, my length of my heel, it's half the number of I count the slip stitches because they're easier to count. I don't count them as I'm doing them. Like mark them off. I've done 1 row of the heel and 2 rows of the heel. I just count the slip stitches. So if I have 32 stitches on for my sock heel, then I look at the slip stitches and I count 16 slip stitches. So that's 32 rows of my heel. Yeah. So it's square from the standpoint of the same number of stitches and rows. Mm-hmm. And usually it's square when I measure it. But if you go a little bit long, if you forget and you go an extra row, that's no big deal. Yeah. Socks are very forgiving because they're stretchy.
Yeah, I think they're pretty forgiving.
And it's nice to be able to make your own socks to make socks that fit your foot better. But I don't agonize over that either because, I mean, honestly, if you go buy a pair of socks, the sock I'm buying fits women's feet anywhere from size 5.5 or 6 shoes up to size 9 or something, right? That's a lot of different foot sizes in that store-bought sock. And there have been times when I bought socks that I think, these store-bought socks that I think, these don't fit very well. But it's pretty rare that my store-bought socks are ill-fitting in the same way that store-bought clothes can be ill-fitting. So, I mean, your knitted socks, you have a lot of leeway for lots of different versions of it to fit well. At least to I'm not that picky about how my socks fit. There's negative ease in socks, so they're stretchy, and so they fit really well. So that's how I make my regular socks. I make my baby socks kind of the same way. It is surprising to me how large babies' feet are. Unless they're newborns, like the newborn size socks are small. They look small, little tiny socks. But once they start to grow, my God, their feet grow fast.
Yeah, it's true. Proportionally, their feet are big.
Yeah.
Like their heads. You know?
You can find charts for sock sizes for different ages of children. And it's shocking how long their feet are at certain ages. So anyway, I think that's probably way more than anybody needs to know about socks. But I thought it might be an interesting discussion to see what we do. Kelly and Marcia on socks.
Yeah. Okay. Now people are like, okay, stop talking about socks now. Well, we have a couple other things we just wanted to talk about. One other topic. And do you want to lead into it?
Well, just kind of an introduction, I think. Maybe we can talk about it more next episode. But I have a start coming up, right? The start of the semester. And I always think of the start of the school year as like my New Year's. People make New Year's resolutions and kind of think of their year as going from January to December. And my year goes from the start of school to the end of school, or the start of school to the next year's start of school. So this is my new year starting now. And so I'm thinking about, new beginnings and what kind of goals do I want to set for myself and what kind of routines do I want? Because, summer is kind of a lack of routine for me. And so it's a good time to start new habits or bring back old habits, get back into routines or start new routines. And so I've kind of been thinking about that kind of thing at this point. And like one of the things that I have in mind is that I want to, when I give an assignment that I need to grade, one of my goals is going to be to actually start that grading process on that day. Kind of like I tell my students, they should start their homework on the day it's assigned. Even if they're not going to finish it, they should start it. And I want to start my homework, which is grading, on the day it's assigned, which is the day I collect it. So that's one of my new routines that I want to kind of get into that habit.
Okay. Well, so is that it? I don't want to
interrupt you. That's
So I'm just, and I think I probably should talk about this because sometimes, if you go and you say it out loud and people hear that you've said it out loud, then you're held accountable because you said it out loud and you have to answer to these people. So I had gone to see, my primary care physician, and then I also went to see a naturopathic doctor, and they both suggested, given pain I'm having in my knees and my back, they were suggesting that I follow this way of eating. It's an anti-inflammatory I don't want to say diet. I'm always going to say way of eating. Anyway, they recommended a book called the Abascal Way or Abascal Way. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but it's Abascal. And I just got the book. I ordered it off of Amazon. And you get 2 books. You get the book that describes this way of eating and why you want to eat this way. And then the second book is a recipe book and sort of shopping lists and meal planning. So I was pretty good. The basic gist of this, and I think this is a lot of people are now doing this, is you cut out refined sugars, dairy, wheat, and I put in my notes, Kelly, I put alcohol, and then I put a little frowny thing. And I should say about a lot of these things, you cut them out for the first 30 days. and you're strict about it. Then then after the first 30 days, then you start introducing some of these things. So they're not saying you can never have wheat, you can never have dairy, you can never have alcohol. The idea is you just reduce the amounts. And the same thing with meat. They're not saying you can't have meat. It's just that you try to eat things proportionally. So your plate is 1/3 meats and grains and 2/3 fruits and vegetables. So if you increase the amount of meat and grains that you eat, then proportionally the amount of fruits and vegetables would also increase. And then it's also just drinking lots of water. Anyway, I had been really good. I followed it for over 2.5 weeks, and I noticed that I felt a lot better. And this is my litmus test is when I walk Enzo and I have to sort of bend down or crouch down to pick up his business, my knees would hurt. And, after 2.5 weeks of following this way of eating, my knees didn't hurt. So I was really motivated. And then, life happens. And I'm not blaming my friends, but what began my downfall was I went out to dinner with some of my friends, and we went to a pub where my options were a hamburger, fish tacos, fish and chips, or spaghetti. None of which are good on to be eaten. So and then I was also greeted at the table like, oh, we poured you a beer. What I learned is, and that's not just their fault, because I also learned then it began the downward spiral that if you're not prepared at home to eat this way, then when you come home and you're hungry, you just go make yourself a peanut butter sandwich because it's quick and easy and you're hungry. So I went to see the naturopathic doctor yesterday, who wrote me, and I posted this on Instagram, so it's probably not new to listeners, but she wrote me another prescription for stress reduction, which is to say no. So I'm now under doctor's orders not to watch the news, and doctor's orders to say no to people. So
very good.
Very funny. Very funny. Anyway, so I promised. I said to her that I want to get back. And so after we finish recording, I'm going to make there's these breakfast muffins that you make that are wheat-free. They're made with almond flour. And they're really quite good. And so I'm going to get back on track. So as I say, after we finish recording, I'm going to make my muffins, and I'm going to go to the store and get stocked up on the things that I need to eat, the fruits and vegetables. And it's a good time to do this to get back on track, because my son's out of town and he eats things that I should not be eating. So,
but that are tempting.
So that are tempting, yeah. And I will say, when I was following this quite well, the cravings because I love bread. There's no, I could live on bread and cheese and wine and soup, but if I started eliminating it, I didn't really crave it anymore. I was kind of surprised. And the same thing with sugars, refined sugars. If I started eliminating the sugar, I didn't crave. Very interesting. So I'm sort of making that commitment to get back on that and again, I'm not going to call it a diet. I'm just going to call it a way of eating. It seems
and routines and habits.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and then so one of the things that I need to do too is find where in my schedule I'm gonna go to the Y, because I restarted my membership, and then I've only been there a couple of times, and actually it's kind of funny. I know they say gyms are. They build their business on the fact that people aren't going to go. But the Y has called me twice. They've emailed me. Oh. They've sent me a letter.
We miss you.
All to say, what can we do? Or would you like to have someone show you around? Or, kind of like, why aren't you here? And what can we do to get you here? So,
Don't make me come get you. Should we get in? Should we come by and pick you up?
Right.
Should we send an Uber to pick you up?
Yes, it's only about 1.5 blocks from my house. But yes, so
that's great.
So we both have really some new beginnings. I need to figure out what my strategies are for putting exercise and sort of discipline about my grading back into my life. And
And then I have one more thing but I'm not going to, I'm going to tantalize people that I have one more commitment that I'm making, but I'm not going to talk about it in this episode only because I need to do some more research.
Oh, okay.
And then, it involves Enzo, but I need to do some more research. And so, so that's my tantalizing thing. So everybody has to listen to the next episode to find out.
And I'll tantalize too before we leave. And that is that we have a new along coming. Marcia doesn't even know what it is because I haven't talked to her about
what is it? Okay, you're surprising me.
Yeah, so next episode, you'll hear something from Marcia about another commitment, and we have a new along coming.
Okay. All right. Now we have to remember that we said this.
Right.
Okay, Kelly. Well, I think, is that pretty much everything that you wanted to talk about?
I think it better be because we're long.
Because this is going to be a long episode. Feel free to skip through us.
Yeah. Just save us for two sessions.
Yeah.
All right, everyone.
All righty. Nice talking to you.
Yes.
We'll talk to you.
All righty. Bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. To subscribe to the podcast, visit 2usfiberadventures.com. We have links for iTunes, Google Play Music, YouTube, and others.
Join us on our adventures on Ravelry and Instagram. I am Better in Motion, and Kelly is 100 Projects.
Until next time, we're the 2 U's
doing our part for World Fleece.